Hey there, I'm Chris, the organizer of PHP Philly. You might notice that you can't hear John talking right here. I managed to forget to hit record on audio for the first 5 minutes. So I had John just record a little, not exactly dub, but just a summary of what he was saying during this first part. When we hit minute 4, we will get to the actual audio of the video. Sorry about that.
Hey, John here. This talk is about the one and only meeting that you absolutely positively need. So I'm a product manager. I get asked about this a lot, and I am really interested in this. Here I am asking the audience, what do you think this meeting might be? Somebody did get it right, but I won't spoil it. Hi, I'm John. I'm a product manager and software developer. I work at Thunk, and we make custom software for clients. And we also do a lot of product consulting and product management as a service where we come in fractionally, work with clients who need some product help. And as a result of this, I get asked this question quite often, which is what process should we use? You know, there's all this stuff out there. I've heard all these things and all these buzzwords. What do you use? What should we do? And we get asked this by clients, and we get asked this by friends who just, build software on their own. And it makes sense kind of at an intuitive level because there's so much stuff out there. You look at sort of tickets and templates and how strict should we be with this? Should we make everyone in the company write tickets the same way? How do we approach this? I keep hearing about, agile, and I know people like to argue on Twitter about big A agile and little A agile and the and linear and Jira and GitHub issues. And there's so many different tools you can use to manage this stuff. Is a plain text document good enough? What about GitHub issues? It doesn't have all the features that linear has. Is that okay? Should we do retrospectives? How often should we be doing them? Should we be doing estimates and burn down charts and measuring velocity? And do we use the Fibonacci sequence for that? And do we do sprints and cycles? And what system do we use for those? How long should they be? 2 weeks, 4 weeks? Do we have cooldowns? Do we do DHH's new thing with shape up? And there's a lot of buzzwords, and it's like it can be a bit overwhelming. Like, what are we actually supposed to do? And my answer commonly for this is, well, you just gave me a big menu of solutions. What are your problems? I love talking about problem statements. But this is not a totally satisfying answer that I give them. It feels like a cop-out. It feels like, why am I not giving them more of a direct answer or more of a helpful answer? I think what I'm saying is true. It is a list of solutions, and I don't yet know what your problems are if I don't know your company well, but I feel like I could get a little bit deeper into this answer, and I want to kind of figure out what the question is behind the question that they're asking. So what are they really driving at? What are they trying to understand when they say, what process should we use? They're asking, what are our solutions? And I want to understand, what is the driving force behind the problem that they're having? And I think the phrase that they're sort of getting at here, the notion that they're getting at is, it could always be better, right? Our development team is right here, right now, but we would like to be somewhere else. It could be better. We need a process for improvement. Maybe a better way of framing the question, instead of what process should we use, is how do we learn? How do we get better? How do we get from point A to point B as a group? And this is a question that I can latch onto much more easily. And that's what this talk is going to be about. So I want to go back to show you a sort of counterexample of when this didn't work so well at my first job as a product manager back in 2018. Palo Alto, and early stage startups have all sorts of problems. Roadmap was non-existent. Our process was terrible. Like we were tripping over each other. We were creating tech debt. We were doing things in like silly ways. I was the chief of staff, and I basically begged them. I was like, I'm pretty sure I want to be a product manager. Please let me do this. And like, they eventually said, okay, great, just try it, give it a shot. And I came in and basically just like dumped a giant bag of solutions onto the table. I was like, hey, I've like talked to people who are good at product management. I've like taken some like online courses and read stuff and like interviewed people about what Agile is. And I was like, I know exactly what we need to do. Monday is like sprint planning day. Tuesday is like estimation day. Wednesday is like, we're gonna do retrospectives and blah, blah, blah. And like basically dumped tons of meetings on everybody's calendar.
led with all of these solutions that they were like, I don't even know what the problem is. Why are you dumping a solution on me? And shockingly, it didn't really work. And aside from the fact that we still had all the problems we had before, now we had a bunch of meetings that were kind of dysfunctional and everyone was mad at me. So I guess the converse of the question before, of like, how do you get better? How do you learn? Is like, why didn't we get better? And why didn't we learn from this? I'm going to take a side quest into pedagogy, talking about how we learn, because I think that we actually have an intuition of how this works at an individual level. So this is Joel. Joel is my jiu-jitsu coach, and I see him many times a week in Manhattan. He is kind of a scary guy. He's fought a lot of MMA, and I'm going to steal an analogy from him, but he's not here. He can't fight me. He can't scare me in Philadelphia. I'm just kidding. He actually gave his blessing to steal this. He uses this analogy. He teaches jiu-jitsu in a really smart and interesting way. And there's obviously a million angles into this. We could talk about how you learn to play guitar, how you learn to break cut, how you learn to do whatever, but it's like this is the thing that I think about all the time. So we're going to talk about this. And he always gives this example whenever he's explaining how he teaches. He says, how would I teach you how to cross the street? Which is like, kind of sounds like a silly question. But you can imagine the way that a lot of people try to teach stuff is they're like, okay, hold on, freeze the city in your mind, right? I just want you to like pause the city, enter the mind palace with me, pause the city in your mind. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna explain step by step exactly how I crossed the street this morning, right? I've crossed many streets. I'm a New Yorker. I've crossed tens of thousands of streets in my life. I could just explain to you precisely what I did, and then you can replicate my steps, you know? So we started out, and then we saw a big mysterious puddle of sewage water, and so we kind of went around it, and then we went forward, and then we went right, and then this cab started like running the red light, and you're like, hey, I'm walking here, and then you like kept on going along the way. So if you just do precisely what I did in like a programmatic way, like commit this to memory, you too can cross the street, right? Like, obviously this is a ridiculous way of teaching, but it happens a lot, and it happens a lot in this field. Is to say, I'm a product manager, I have more experience than you do, just do exactly what I did, it's worked for me before. And it's kind of silly when you think of it in those terms. For one, as soon as we unfreeze the city and throw you out onto the street, you're going to die. And also, just as importantly, I mean, not as importantly as dying, but importantly, you didn't learn, right? Like you didn't actually learn anything about how to cross streets. So we get back to this question, how do we learn if it's not that? And I'll take you on a quick journey of just how Joel does class, because this is what's on my mind right now. We start class and we don't do any warm-up, we don't do anything. We start by just going at it. We basically spar with a partner. And he's like, okay, John, you're on top. Daniel, you're on bottom. Here's the position you're in. John, here's your goal. Here's your goal. And he says, go. We go for 3 minutes, then we switch positions. You get your chance to. And we just start sparring, right? So you could say that we start with concrete experience with an objective. I add this little with an objective because I think this really matters a lot. If you go back to the like traffic analogy, like if you don't have an objective in your work, in your concrete experience, you are running around in traffic blind, and that is a good way to also die. So after a few minutes of this, Joel pulls us back in and is like, hey, here's some problems I saw you running into, right? I noticed, John, you're having a hard time like keeping your balance here. I noticed other people were like not staying behind the elbow, whatever. And he basically just starts troubleshooting based on, not sort of in a theoretical way, he's troubleshooting our concrete experience. And he's just like helping to show us, like, here's what I'm seeing, what are you seeing? This is reflective observation. Over time, you do this a bunch and you kind of like cycle through this repeatedly, you start to see patterns and you start to see, oh, I'm making the same mistakes in a similar way. Oh, things are working well when I do blah, blah, blah. And you start to abstract out these like principles about what's going on based on these patterns. And you are able to apply those to other situations and start to understand like the principles that are working and not working for you. And you get basically your own mental model of this. We can call this abstract conceptualization. And finally, you just implement what you learned and you try again, and you just do this over and over. All of Joel's classes are just in the context of just like, just get out there and try it. come back and reflect, get out there and try it, experiment, experiment, experiment. We can call this active experimentation. So this is one of those things where I'm like, I'm just putting words to something that you all understand intuitively, right? Like, how did you learn how to talk? How did you learn how to ride a bike? How did you learn to cross the street? How did you learn to program? This is kind of an intuitive model of how we actually learn to do things. I'm guessing that no one in here would say that they really learned to write code in a classroom. They learned to write code something closer to this. This is my good friend Daniel Colborn, if you've ever heard of him before, real dirtbag. This is how I learned to write code. I've told this story a bunch of times, so I won't belabor it, but we wanted to build a game. Daniel said, I will not build your game for you, but I will help you learn to write code. And so he just said, every Sunday night, he'd pull Jacob Davis and I in and say, let me give you a task that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and just give it a shot. I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, just give it a shot. It's a safe environment. Try to make it work. We'll fix it later. This is concrete experience with an objective. Every Sunday night, he would give us code review. He said, here's some stuff I saw you running into. Here's something very silly you did. There's a better way to do this. Do you see how this works? And this is obviously reflective observation. Over time, we start to understand and see patterns, and I start to go like, this is interesting. You write collection methods in a very different way than I do. And he's like, aha, yes, there's this great book by Adam Wadden that you need to go read. And I start to see this pattern in all these other places, and I'm going back and refactoring my own code, even though Daniel didn't ask me to, because now I have a better pattern for understanding it. This is abstract conceptualization. And finally, we just keep on trying. We do this week after week after week, and Jacob Davis and I both become real programmers, and it's very exciting. I'm guessing this is somewhat similar to how you learned to write code. This is David Cole. I'm stealing all of this from him. This is a psychologist and educator who had this extremely influential idea of experiential learning theory. This is, well, again, one of those things that it's like, this is not really mind-blowing. It's like he's putting a framework and words to something that each of us understands intuitively. This is how we learn things. Concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, active experimentation, over and over and over until you get great. Another term that I love for this is like enlightened trial and error. This came from IDEO, who's this awesome design lab out in the Bay Area who's been very influential about a number of really cool tech products over the years. So the question is, how do we do this as teams, right? We understand this at the individual level. We just put some like academic-y words to it for something that we all kind of intuitively understand. But it's actually really interesting and weird to think about, how do you do this as a team? Because like the mental model we need to develop is not just something that exists in your head. It has to be like shared among several people. And that's a very different thing, right? You are exposing ideas and getting this kind of like reflective experience out there so that you can grow and learn together, which is really, we can use a similar model for it, but it's actually quite different because it's with a team and we're gonna have to talk a lot. It could always be better. So this is how we're going to approach how we can get better. And as we talked about with like crossing the street, you don't need a prescriptive set of solutions to do this. We're getting back to like your software development team and how you actually get better. You don't need me to tell you how I cross the street. You don't need a long, huge menu of solutions to be dumped onto your table. You need situational awareness, right? You need to understand what is going on around you and to like reflect on it and to understand what is happening. You need to be able to solve problems in like an improvisational way. You need group level learning, which is a very different kind of thing from individual learning. And so you need this one indispensable meeting. Back to the beginning of this talk, do we have any guesses now as to what is the one indispensable part of this, in my view? The retrospective, the humble retrospective. I'm curious, do people in here do these regularly? And do you guys, I'm curious also, do you do them just when something went wrong? Or do you just do them?
Cyclically,
Great.
consistently.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna get into this. How do we do retrospectives? How do they work? Step one, obviously, is just go work. I don't need to tell you to do that. You're already doing that. I would say if you don't have clear goals and objectives, go work on that. That's a whole separate thing. But get some concrete experience. I don't think we need to push on that at all. So step two, regularly, we do it once a week at Thunk. We do it every 2 weeks at InterNACHI. We do this with basically every client that we do. We have a retrospective, and we, at the very least, I'd say like once a month, but probably more than that. You go around the room and everyone gets to answer this question: what went well and what could improve? There's a couple important parts of this. When I say everybody answers this, I mean literally everybody. It's really important that this is actually not just a wide open forum, because the most opinionated and loudest people will dominate the conversation. I mean literally, like, Joe, what went well and what can improve? Chris, your turn, what went well and what can improve? We go around one by one. You pause and celebrate number one. You don't just do this when something blows up. This is not like a response to an incident. This is just like part of the fabric of working together, right? This is obviously reflective observation on your concrete experience. We have now aired out, so we, like, as a group, are doing a reflective observation. So then after that is this fun part where we get to match solutions to the problems we have. We just aired out all these problems. Now we get to match solutions to them. The kind of fun thing here is that you get to start looking for patterns of success and failure with your team. And I would suggest also glancing through previous weeks. We've had times where we do this and we are actually cracking up on our calls because for 4 weeks in a row, we've listed like a very similar set of problems. And we're like, we didn't even notice intuitively that this was happening, but by doing this process together, we realized we're like, oh my gosh, we're saying the same thing every week for 4 weeks in a row. I guess it's time to fix this. As you do this, it's helpful to remember that, like, your job is to recognize the best idea. Creative thinking is helpful here, but honestly, as we talked about before, there's a huge menu of existing solutions, most of which are, like, useful in some circumstances. So you can reach for these different ideas, and your job is not really to be a creative genius and have the best idea. Your job is to recognize the best idea and embrace it, regardless of who said it, regardless of where the idea was stolen from. And so what this means is, like, it's actually really helpful to have a giant menu of solutions, even though you don't use all of them. You should be open and steal liberally, and you should go out and try to learn as many of these things as possible. This is a group of people who, if you have ever heard me say something smart, there's like a 95% chance that I have stolen it verbatim or very closely paraphrased one of the people in this slide. And what's funny is, as I started doing it, I was like, oh, Merlin Mann is a podcaster, and like 90% of the smart things he says actually came from David Allen, who's next to him. And like, there's Daniel Colborn over there. I've learned a lot from him, but honestly, like 80% of the smart things he says, he stole from Matt Stauffer. And Matt Stauffer probably stole it from somebody before him, right? The smartest people I know are like sponges who just like soak up these ideas, but then they're also quite selective with where they actually deploy them. And you can be really picky about how you use these solutions, but having a big list of things like at your disposal is actually really helpful. Daniel just the other day mentioned this like meeting that they do with one of their clients where they're like, they review everything and demo it for each other right before merging it in, so that like everyone in the company understands how every feature works. And it's like worked really well for them. I was like, I've never done something like that. That's like, I'm like filing that away as like, another thing on my menu. Interesting. This is obviously abstract conceptualization. We, as a group, are identifying patterns, and as a group are matching solutions to specific problems. And finally, I think it's just really helpful to go back and review all the things you said you were going to do on previous weeks. This one's very easy to skip because we're saying what could go differently, and we're making a plan, we're coming up with solutions. And it's very easy to just write those down and never revisit them. I think this is a really critical part of the meeting, is go back through and be like, look back through the last few weeks and say, what are all the things we committed to doing previously? Are we actually doing them? Did it actually solve the problem? Do we need to revisit it? This is really critical. Keep on trying, stay humble, and have fun. This is obviously our active experimentation. A couple of just pro tips if you're doing this is rotate who takes notes. I found this is very, very useful. Actually, don't do this at InterNACHI, we should. But it's helpful to remind, like as a product manager, it's a helpful reminder that it's like, this is not my meeting, this is like our meeting. I mean, obviously I benefit from it, but it's like, it's really for all of us, and we all own this meeting kind of together. Also, when different people take notes, different things come out. People will write things down in a way where I'm like, oh, that's not even how I heard that. Interesting, like you put your own color on that, and that's like different from what I heard. Interesting. Another pro tip is whoever has the most power in the meeting speaks last. The person who has the most power, if they speak first, it can really color how everyone else talks. And the junior developer who like actually had something on their mind, let them go first. Let them air out what they're thinking about before it gets dominated by like the engineering manager or whoever's on that call. That's it. It's really not that hard of a meeting. It can actually be 30 minutes long. It's one of those things that's incredibly simple and it is extremely powerful. It's like kind of one of those, like the way Taylor describes like how DD is like the most like bang for your buck function in Laravel. This is like the most bang for your buck meeting in my mind. And so my new answer for this question is not like, oh, I don't really know. Honestly, my dream scenario is do nothing except for the retrospective and let everything else grow organically out of that. And if you do that, I actually think that there's a good chance that your process will end up looking completely different from mine, and that's actually a good sign. Because I don't presume that the process that I use at a given company is going to work for you. In fact, I'm PMing at like 3 companies right now, and we're all doing completely different things because it's a completely different set of circumstances at each company. Okay, so what? I just spent like 20 minutes talking about a meeting that you guys maybe already knew about. Why does this matter? Who cares? I actually think that there's something pretty profound and beautiful in this that gets me really excited and like it's kind of moving to me actually. The thing is like, you will always have pain, but the question is like, what will you do with it, right? So it's like, as you work, as you write code, as you interact with other people, as your manager like throws things on your desk, as your customers throw a fit, whatever is going on, like you will have all sorts of pain at work and obviously outside of work, but we're talking about work right now. The question is like, what becomes of your pain? What do you want to do with it? And it's like, what happens to pain when you ignore it? For one, it can like fester. Obviously, it can turn into something ugly. It can become infected and become much worse and affect other parts of the organization. It can turn into resentment. I mean, when it's like pain between 2 people and it goes unaddressed and you don't turn it into anything, it can boil over and turn into resentment. It can explode. We've probably seen this happen with the workplace, and it's like ugly, and it can make you miserable, and it can make other people miserable too. I think that this retrospective process is this like alchemy almost. It's this like magical thing that can turn pain into wisdom. This is like when you're a little kid and your mom tells you like, don't touch the iron, it's hot. Don't touch the iron, it's hot. And I remember this vivid memory when I was like 4. And I was like, what does that mean? And it's like, and like, that gave me some real practical wisdom, and it like really sucked that day, but it's like that turned into wisdom about how to move around the world. And I think that if you fail to do a good retrospective process, you're just having pain. But if you do a good retrospective process, then your pain is like giving you something. It's turning your team into something that is stronger and better. From this, you can grow meeting, other processes organically. Every process that your team adopts is something that came out of this like shared experience of like, oh, something was painful, and as a team, we addressed it. That's like a beautiful and exciting thing. You do this for long enough with the same group of people, and you get like almost like this like custom fit process that just fits your team perfectly. Someone leaves the team or someone joins the team, and it will like organically grow into a slightly different thing because now you're a slightly different group of people. So when I say it could always be better, it can sound like this is like perfectionism. I was like kept saying this phrase over and over, and I realized that like there's kind of 2 ways to interpret it. It can sound like perfectionism, or it can even sound like sort of like a stern parent like wagging their finger at you, right? Like this could always be better. You got an A-, it could have been an A+. And that's actually not what I mean by that. I realized that writing this talk is like, there's something more beautiful to this, which is like, that phrase is humility to acknowledge that things are not perfect. And I think it is courage to face the problems and the pain that you're having and actually embrace them. This is an act of courage. It's not easy to do, to sit down, pull your shoulders back and go like, what are our problems? Where are we falling short? And I think that it's also an act of radical optimism to basically sit down together and say, we actually think next week will be better. And that's a pretty beautiful and cool thing to do with your teammates. That text is not supposed to be white, but Daniel likes to make fun of me for being a complete psycho for using these types of work things in my home life. But this is my incredible fiance, Lindsay, and we're getting married in 2 weeks. And we do this every Saturday morning. It's completely incredible. It has done like wonders for our relationship. And sometimes
Lizard person.
You what?
Lizard person.
Yeah, a lizard person. But like sometimes, rarely, like something big and important will come up in it. But because we're doing it regularly, like a lot of the times, the stuff that comes up is like, hey, this was actually a really fun week. You know what I would do differently? Is like, we should go on more walks. It's like, awesome, high five. That's pretty easy to do. Like, problem solved, you know? So this process has like worked wonders for all of the teams that I'm on, and now the most important team that I'm on, it is also helping with that quite a bit. And so I invite you to give it a shot too, and I hope your team benefits a lot from it. That's it.